then what would be the major force against them? And here we come again back to the Kurds. Of course, there would be NGOs, other civic, let's say, points of resistance and so on. But I think with the massive votes that would come from the Turkish population to BDP in the southeast, okay, and with the representatives elected from the southeast, the Kurdish movement will be one of the major oppositions to the power entrusted to AKP. In that case, okay, and you also may have heard that Abdullah Öcalan said, unless some steps are taken immediately after the elections, there might even be a war in Turkey starting on the 13th or the 14th of June. This has been on the press. I'm not making it up. So in that case, you know, AKP might do two things. One would be to take on the challenge and say, let's go and see who's stronger. And the other one would be to come to terms with the Kurdish movement and its demands and appease them to a certain extent. Of course, in the first case, if they take on the challenge, the consequences would be extremely grave. We know the military power of PKK, we know what's happening in the southeast. We also know that when only a couple of weeks ago, when the Turkish military forces crossed the border and killed the PKK members in Iraq, their relatives also crossed the border against the military hospitals. They collected the corpses and the bodies of their relatives, and they brought them back to Turkey to give them proper burial. So at this point, you know, it is obvious that military measures would not be sufficient to stop a problem of that dimension. So the other possibility, of course, is the more reasonable one, because such a situation would lead to extreme instability in Turkey, which would not be tolerated either by, you know, let's say, the bourgeoisie or the upper middle class or the middle class, and I don't think AKP could risk that kind of instability, and so they will take some mitigated steps. What are those steps? I do not think, for example, that, this is my personal opinion, any democratic autonomy will be granted. Part of the reason is that I don't think that BDP will be able to get any candidates from the West into the parliament, so they will remain restricted to the southeast. So they won't get autonomy, but there will be certain concessions, certain steps taken. For example, the official and constitutional recognition of Kurdish identity is one of them. Educational instruction in native language or mother's tongue is another possibility. Amnesty to political prisoners, in particular those who have been arrested in the KCK case. KCK is Konya Civaken Kurdistan. It's a platform asking for democratic autonomy and so on. Of course, there's always the risk that my colleagues have already mentioned, namely if the number of deputies of AKP stays below 330, none of these constitutional changes can be taken, and that would still provide or produce problems. But I do have reasons to be, in a way, certain reasons to be optimistic on certain sides. One of them is a very recent and happy development in Turkey, namely that Kenan Evren, who orchestrated the military coup in 1980, as well as the commander of the air forces at the time, had been summoned by the Ankara Deputy Prosecutor's Office to testify in an investigation into the atrocities committed during the coup. And even the general would also have to testify, but he died in a military hospital. Today, the subpoena was issued by the prosecutor. Another significant development was the commemoration of the executed politicians in the 1960 military coup in the island where they were tried. Okay, this was allowed, and so on. There are similar cases. I mean, I don't want to go into the details because I don't, as I said, I want to keep it short. So there will be, economic openings I expect that I would welcome. But on the pessimistic side, I think the expectations of the left in the economic realm will certainly not be met. And the problem is that this is not part of the agenda of BTP. Again, they have another agenda, and so the economic questions of the left will remain untouched. So these are my predictions. For the conclusion, okay, what does the elections mean to me? I will go back to YASIN's point or remark about tolerance. Tolerance is something needed, not only between the Turks and the minorities, or the Turks, or the white Turks versus the Muslim Turks, or the radical Muslim Turks, or those different groups of people who are in some kind of tension with each other. Okay. What I think is, in Turkey, what we need is to create the conditions of coexistence and therefore create a new community. And although tolerance is needed for that, I don't think that kind of the conditions of coexistence can be established by recognition the other, the Kurd, the Muslim, or anyone, any other, under any name, in his or her ethnic, rational, religious identity. I think on the contrary, it can only be established on the basis of contestation. Not on the basis of recognition, but on the basis of contestation. Because I can coexist, or to coexist, I personally, or anyone else, I think, would need to go out of himself or herself, and this would require that one puts one's own being into question. Right? It's not a question of recognizing other. It's a question of putting my own being into a question. And contestation would be the only way to do that, in my view. And I do think that, or I do hope that, the negotiations after the elections will not only be a matter of negotiating concerning the other as such, or under a certain identity, ethnic, religious, or whatever, but also a process in which the parts put their own being into question and question themselves and their identities. Thank you.